My name is Benjamin Glover, and welcome back to A Younger Voice. Joining me today is Patrick Harris Sr., a high school dropout who went on to lead the Alcor Life Extension Foundation as its CEO. He's now running as a Democratic candidate in Arizona's 7th. Would you like to introduce yourself and your flagship proposal, Cap the Cap?
Hi, I'm Patrick Harris Sr., former healthcare executive, and I also did work at Alcor as a nonprofit, but I spent over 20 years in corporate healthcare, primarily on the pharmacy and the technology side. I've filed over 43 patents. I've been up to the Hill to build coalitions and get a bill introduced that was co-sponsored with bipartisanship. I retired in May of 2022 at the age of 44 after putting myself through college, raising 6 kids, and I've been sitting here for the last 3 years trying to determine what to do next with my life. I was inspired after last year's 2024 election, watching what was happening, to come up with a solution to help close the gap on wealth inequality and put the American dream back in reach for my kids and future generations. So I created what's called capitated capitalism, more commonly referred to as Cap the Cap. What it says in short is we set a cap of total net wealth, and I'm proposing that we start at $1 billion. It's adjusted annually for COLA to future-proof against inflation. And then anytime someone exceeds the cap, all that excess, they're given 12 months to reinvest back into the economy, however they choose, to preserve individual choice, which is true to capitalistic principles. As a backstop, there's a tax for any of the excess that's not reinvested after 12 months. I've already typed up a draft of the 28th Amendment. It will require an amendment to the US Constitution, and I think it's time to put America back on course.
Great. Thank you so much. That was an excellent summation. Could you speak a little bit about the specific ramifications of your proposal on young people in Arizona's 7th, but also across the country?
Sure. Let me go back in time a little. Not that I was there, but if you look at history, and we need to, otherwise it repeats itself, all the way back to Rome. Rome collapsed, and I think that's where you are today, right, Benjamin?
Yep.
Out there in Rome. Rome collapsed a long time ago because the root issue was wealth hoarding. And then if you look at the French Revolution or the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia and throughout many other countries, throughout all of history, when the wealthy end up accumulating too much wealth and they hold on to it, they're in their own class of competition. And they hoard more and more and more, leaving less wealth for the vast majority of people. When that happens, eventually you reach a tipping point where it hurts an entire nation and the people end up revolting, a revolution. So this pattern in history repeats time and time and time again. Now, here in 2025, current era, we're watching the greatest disparity between the most people ever in history. Just a few months ago, I was reporting that there was 800 billionaires in the US that were hoarding over $6 trillion. The most recent Forbes list came out, and there's apparently now 900 billionaires in the US with over 300 million people, most of which are living paycheck to paycheck. You hear many of the lawmakers that are out there. You see all the statistics. I mean, Bernie Sanders and AOC and others. And now there's even a rise of socialism that's happening in New York, which is not good for the future. We don't want socialism. And I can get into all the academic reasons for that later, or encourage people to take Econ 101. What capitated capitalism does, and it's a new to the world economic framework, is it sets that very high cap that I spoke about earlier at $1 billion, which is more than enough to live on for whatever your lifestyle is for many, many lifetimes. But what it does is it creates an incentive to reinvest money on an annual basis to keep the economy healthy. An economy is a lot like our circulatory system. When blood is moving, we're healthy. When it's not, we're dead. So when you have too much of the economy that's not moving and is being hoarded by a select few, others go without. And we've seen this throughout all of human history. So capitated capitalism tells the wealthy, if you don't reinvest it into the economy, you choose however you want. But if you don't, then it will be taxed. The choice is yours. Turn your material capital into social capital and do something good with all that excess wealth.
So that's interesting. Could I ask, is there any limitations on how these billionaires would be able to distribute this wealth back into the economy?
Under capitated capitalism, it's designed not to limit them. It's only one simple rule: keep the money moving. So if, for example, one of the billionaires, Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, they want to pay obscene salaries to rocket scientists and, go to Mars or wherever, that's fine, as long as they're not hoarding the capital themselves. They're still creating jobs, and as they create jobs, even at those very high levels, that's when the 16th Amendment comes in, and when capital flows, it gets taxed, right? So, and that's healthy for an economy. If they want to be philanthropic and give money to, their church or to a hospital or help rebuild, educational institutions, that's great. They can do that too. If they want to be nepo and give $1 billion to their kids, so they can do that as well. Of course, there will be a tax on the transfer, which is good for and healthy for the economy. And once their kids reach billion-dollar status, they'll also be at the cap, and any excess capital their wealth generates needs to be reinvested year after year as well under the system. The only limitation is don't spend it illegally. For example, a congressional candidate that might be running in Arizona's 7th Congressional District, don't put an assassination hit on him. That would be illegal.
Sounds like you should hire some private security.
I'm not a billionaire. Can't afford that.
So before we delve into a little bit of more youth-focused issues, I do want to ask one economics question about the proposal. Specifically, how does the proposal prevent capital flight from the United States?
Part of the proposal, and actually I encourage you to go to the website, it's apolitical. So I have a political website, which is patrickseniorforcongress.com. The capthecap.com website is apolitical. And on it will explain our vision and a global economy where we build what's called the CCB, a capitated capitalism bloc. Essentially, member nations come together and they agree to share information on billionaires, and they agree not to exceed a certain cap between nations, benchmarked against what the US sets, which I'm proposing is at 1 billion. So anytime a billionaire tries to flee the United States, they would end up going to a member nation, more likely than not, and their wealth could be tracked between nations to prevent wealth flight. Now, there may be nations that try to hold out, but they won't have the economic leverage of the bloc, because the bloc is going to have the greatest economy in the world. It can be more powerful than NATO, not militarily, but economically. Further, there's already existing laws. If they try to run away and revoke their citizenship, they do have to pay an exorbitant amount of their wealth back to the United States, because economic security is national security. The US doesn't exist to serve single billionaires. They're part of a bigger system. So I think it would be foolish for any billionaire to try to run away, because their lifestyle will actually decrease. They may be able to hoard their money and be greedy, but you think they'll have a better lifestyle with multiple billions of dollars outside of the US, or $1 billion inside of the US with the security and everything that it offers? So I think wealth flight is a big bluff. As a matter of fact, I put out a video on my YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and you search Patrick Harris Sr., it's Capitated Capitalism episode 10. So, and it briefly talks about wealth flight, but the CCB is designed to help mitigate against that.
Okay, great. So I want to shift a little bit to your own personal experiences. I want to ask you a little bit about how your own personal experiences as a young person have shaped your character as a candidate.
Sure. Well, my experience, I guess you could say I've lived multiple lives, right? When my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer, I was a very young teenager. She was terminal. I didn't make the wisest choices. I dropped out of high school. After she passed away, I was briefly homeless, not for a long period of time. People can camp longer than I was homeless, but I did experience that, so I know what it's like not to know where you're going to sleep at night. I had to put myself through school. I got my GED. I went in and qualified for Mensa, so just to understand what my capabilities were at an intellectual level. I started at a community college. When I started going back, I took a bunch of CLEP tests. I was working full time behind the pharmacy counter. Put myself through school really quick. Like 8 months, I think I got my 2-year degree. Transferred to St. Martin's University, started going pre-med, but couldn't afford medical school. And at the time, there were no scholarships available for me because I didn't have the demographic makeup to be able to get it, even though my grades were good, any scholarships. I did get one small scholarship from my credit union, which I'm still appreciate to today. Pell Grant helped out a little bit, but I had to continue borrowing money. I transferred to St. Leo University, which is where I got my undergraduate in business. And then I continued on to get my master's in business administration. All the time, through that entire time, I was working full time. So I went to school full time and working full time. And I had babies. So on personal experience, my first marriage ended up in divorce. I got custody of the kids. So my 2 biological kids. I was a single parent. I know the struggle with that as well, to pay bills. My second marriage, she brought 4 kids to the marriage, so there were 6 of them. I ended up adopting them, and they took my surname. It's expensive to raise kids. So I guess my experience includes being a high school dropout, includes being a graduate student, includes being homeless, and achieving the American dream. Of home ownership and being able to retire early. It includes being a single parent, an executive in the corner office on the top floor. I've got a lot of breadth of experience as a candidate. But when I look around, when I finally slowed down to take an inventory of my life and the lives of people around me, and I woke up, so to speak, I noticed a lot of other people are struggling to get the American dream. And that's when I started asking myself, what do I do with the balance of my life? Could I open a company and innovate and file more patents and chase the almighty dollar? Sure. But, when I'm sitting on my deathbed, is that something I'm going to be proud of? So I don't think so. I think what needs to happen is a structural change to enable more people to achieve what I achieved. Because in some ways I got lucky.
I see. I want to stay on that specific issue with young people that you spoke of a little bit. I want to talk about, if you could speak a little bit about how your proposals could help alleviate some of the barriers that young people have right now to entering the job market, to finding sustainable jobs in the long term.
Sure. So under Cap the Cap, it forces money to flow. So rather than a billionaire sitting back and saying, I'm going to wait this next year or this next 10 years to invest money for greater returns, they're going to have to keep money circulating. That in and of itself puts trillions of dollars back into the economy. It creates jobs. And when jobs are created, it's basic supply and demand from a labor perspective. A lot of young people have more jobs to choose from and more negotiating power to be able to get better paying jobs. Further, if you consider the cases of extreme wealth, and we could use Jeff Bezos or we can use the Walton family. I like using the Walton family because they just became the richest family in the world. Sam Walton created Walmart. The Walton family inherited Walmart. And if you look back just last year, the amount of wealth they gained in 1 year, and you take the number of employees they have, each of their employees generated an additional $110,000 of net wealth for the Walton family. While most people at Walmart are sitting here wondering, how do they pay their bills? And you have taxpayers covering their medical expenses and everything else. So we got a problem with unchecked capitalism. This cap-to-cap platform forces that money to circulate. And while it remains the choice of those who have excess wealth how to spend their money, they still get a chance to do so, creating jobs throughout multiple different sectors for the benefit of young people. Further, we are so far in debt. The last time the United States was debt-free was 190 years ago, 1835. And in that 190 years, We've accumulated over $37 trillion in debt. We just passed that big, beautiful bill act. It's going to add more money to the debt. Your guys' future is being mortgaged for the greed of today. By putting more money, trillions circulating into the economy without raising tax rates, you can actually create greater tax receipts for the government and start paying down that debt so that your dollar goes further in the future.
Great. Thank you so much for that answer. And I want to touch on a point that you touched on a little bit when you spoke about Walmart's employees, and then you spoke a little bit about when you touched on the debt, and you talked about the big, beautiful bill. Specifically, could I ask if you could speak about how your proposal would help expand healthcare access in the United States to those most in need, especially right now when we're facing unparalleled Medicare cuts? Medicaid cuts, excuse me.
So healthcare is a very, very complicated segment, and I spent a career in healthcare, right? And I've seen the back end and sat in the middle of all these transactions, and I've got a pretty good handle. I'm one of the few in the nation that have seen what I've seen in healthcare. While cap the cap alone doesn't address specifically healthcare, it does indirectly help with healthcare. For example, when you can apply for and obtain jobs that are better paying, part of that pay, that compensation, may be in salary, so you can buy healthcare yourself, or it could be part of your complete compensation package. For example, if you're working for Amazon or Walmart, and the Walton family or Jeff Bezos can't get any more money themselves, they can't acquire any more wealth, why would they not pay their employees more? And that could impact their compensation package, including delivering good quality healthcare to their employees, which I think would be the right thing to do as a business executive myself. However, they may have other plans under the cap to cap platform on what they want to do. Beyond cap to cap, I've also proposed MFN plus type legislation. So right now, our government, and I've seen the back end of this in managed care, there's rates that Medicaid, the VA, Medicare all pay, but private insurers come down and negotiate lower rates. If you look at the Fortune list, you'll see CVS Caremark, you'll see United Healthcare, you'll see all of these huge insurance companies and PBMs producing so much wealth for their shareholders, but it's at the expense of our taxpayers, of government-funded healthcare. So with MFN, which is most favored nations, what that allows, and if you put it in from a legislative perspective, then you can bypass this whole question of, is the government allowed to negotiate rates? We're not negotiating. We're just matching what is negotiated. So when a private payer negotiates lower than what the government pays, the government's allowed to match that rate. Now the question is, if you're on the healthcare side, hospital, pharmacy, otherwise, you want to be careful of invoking MFN, because your book of business all of a sudden can reduce your revenues and you may not be able to operate, which is why I've proposed adding the plus part to it. Anytime a private payer negotiates lower than MFN, if they invoke MFN, the hospital, the pharmacy, the healthcare provider in the community can choose to say, nope, you're fired because we can't afford to reduce our revenue in total. What this does is it creates a very powerful incentive to shift the cost from taxpayers, government-funded healthcare, towards the private payers who are already producing so much extra wealth, and they're supposed to be more efficient than government, at least theoretically under capitalism.
All right, great. I just want to shift gears here a little bit back to education. I actually want to talk about secondary education. You've had a unique experience in the secondary education system. We talked a little bit about the economic ramifications of your plan. I want to ask, in your opinion, what is the biggest failure of the American secondary school system?
Antiquated. The biggest failure, I'm always going to point back to money. So one of the reasons I was able to get through school as quickly as I did is because I took CLEP tests, college level entrance examination, right? And I tested out of classes. It saved me, entire semesters. It saved me a year, including not just the time of that year, but the cost of that year, and it put me into the workforce. Well, I was in the workforce, but it elevated me in the workforce that much faster. We need to start working with our universities to be able to say, look, we understand that you want to bring people in as a freshman and put them through that full freshman because you're getting the revenue for it. But your model must change because we need an educated public. If somebody comes in and they already know algebra, college level algebra, why force them to go through it again? Test them on it. You may be looking at their high school, classes, but some people like me spent a lot of time in the library and not necessarily in class. So I was able to accumulate a lot of knowledge and master subjects that I was able to test out of. I think what we need to do is develop a battery exam, which I know that there's the SAT and the ACT and stuff like that, but we need to start looking at, if you already have mastered a subject, don't put somebody back through it, move them on to the next level. Also, I think when it comes to secondary education, it's not the traditional, you're 18 years old and you go to college and then you're 22 and you get your 4-year degree. That hasn't really been the case for decades. A lot of people will start their education and then because of life experience or something that happens, they need to go into the workforce. Maybe there was a child that was born or a parent that's sick, or they themselves have encountered something, and then they want to return to school later. So what we should be doing, in my opinion, is start to have a broader discussion about making bigger degrees more bite-sized. So you may go in and get, kind of like what they did with the community college, right? Community college, you go for a 2-year degree, you get your associate's degree, and then you can transfer to start at your 3rd year. We can develop programs where all of a sudden you get a 1-year degree, and maybe that 1-year degree allows for you to do some type of job, and you get into the workforce and you start doing that job. But that 1-year degree would count towards the 4-year degree, and then you go back later and you get a 2nd degree. A lot like how you start with apprentice, journeymanship, etc. But we apply that more to college. I don't have the exact answer because I haven't been a professional educator all my life, but I can tell you from my lived experience, it would be nice to be able to take these in more bite-sized pieces and still be able to work towards a degree, even if it took me 5 or 10 years to get there.
I see. Right. Okay, so we've kind of touched on education and healthcare and a lot of the issues that young people are facing right now. I kind of want to bring them all together, and I want to ask an overreaching question. How do we as young people get more involved in fixing these issues and in building a tomorrow where we aren't facing these unprecedented challenges?
Couple of other policy questions before we move on to how you guys can help my generation, help your generation, if we can do that. So I want to put a few other policy ideas out there. On minimum wage, federal minimum wage. I know the states and the munis are doing their own thing, but the federal minimum wage hasn't moved for a very long time. When you consider something like capitated capitalism, cap the cap, and you're forcing capital to flow, I think we need to stop looking at things as purely black and white when it comes to minimum wage. I like the idea of a progressive minimum wage, meaning you take a figure and then you multiply it by how old someone is, because costs rise over time. And whatever their age is, you multiply that by that figure, and that becomes the federal minimum wage. By way of example, a 16-year-old may be going out for their first job. They're gaining experience for the first time. They're getting extra spending money. They're not actually having to pay the electric bill in most cases, their rent and everything else, cost of living. So as a 16-year-old, if you set that figure of the federal minimum wage, progressive minimum wage at 50 cents per year, then that 16-year-old's minimum wage would be $8. But a 60-year-old should not be paid $8 per hour if they have to be in the workforce. They have a tremendous amount of experience behind them, and they have a cost of living that the 16-year-old doesn't. That 50 cents for a 60-year-old would become $30 an hour for minimum wage. I think these are discussions we need to start having because we need to take care of both sides of our generational gap, right? Those that are in the older, more, the older segment, as well as those that are younger to help lift them up through education. Another policy idea I'd like to start talking about is getting our younger generations involved with policy, involved with civics. And this will actually lead into your question. But the policy idea is create a tax credit for voting. That's simple. It doesn't matter who you vote for. You can vote Republican, Independent, Democrat, whatever party you want. As long as you vote, then a minor amount of information will be sent to the IRS saying you did vote. It doesn't matter. They don't need to know who you voted for. But because you voted, you would get a tax credit. It'll do two things. It'll get you out and say, oh, that tax credit might only be $100. But to an 18-year-old, $100 is a nice little bump. All you have to do is show up and say, this is who I think we should vote for. Now all you have to do is spend $20 or do it for free to file your taxes, and you get $100. You do that year after year after year, all of a sudden, those 18-year-olds that may not want to be politically engaged are motivated to be. They may not be filing their taxes, start to develop the good, right habits to do so, and that follows them through the rest of their life. Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So that would help with voter turnout, certainly. All right, great. So I'm going to move to our last section here, which is a little lightning round. It's a few questions, short answers, no pressure. First answer that comes to your mind.
Did you want me to talk about how I think you guys can help?
I would love that. Absolutely.
Exactly what you're doing. You were born into a digital native, generation, which is fantastic because in my generation, I would actually have to pick up a phone with a cord attached to the wall or drive to meet somebody or bicycle. But you guys can reach someone instantaneously around the world. And you can do so with technology that can create translation, especially with AI, to speak globally. So when good policy ideas like Cap the Cap and the CCB, the block, come up, you can raise global awareness to start to create public pressure for good policy ideas. So what you're doing is fantastic. Replicate what you're doing in others to get them involved in their own future. So
great. That's very kind.
Yeah.
Right. So lightning round. First one, easiest question you'll get all day. I guarantee it. What's your favorite thing about America?
Diversity. Caveat. Unlike any other nation in the world, America invites immigration from all cultures. And we have such diversity. I mean, we're not a singular people, right? It is our greatest strength because it brings diversity of thought. It brings so many wonderful things. It has a drawback because when you have a bunch of, mixed tribes, so to speak, in this huge melting pot, those that are in power, be it media, money, political, or whatever, it's very easy for them to create division within our nation. But when you can get such a diverse population unified on a same objective, we're unstoppable. So our greatest strength, and this is also our greatest weakness, is diversity. But when we, the people, can come together and say, there's a few people at the top trying to separate us, and we're going to unify, and no more are they going to separate us. We're actually going to say, this is time for change. We can't be stopped.
Diversity is a great answer. It's mine as well. So it's actually, I love that answer. Yeah. So why should young people vote for you?
This is what I would prefer to respond with. Young people should vote, period. They should vote their conscience, period. Some young people will like me. That's great. Some young people will like somebody else. That's great. You don't need to vote for me, but if you vote your conscience for somebody else because of their personality and you still like my policies, pressure them to adopt those policies. Vote for policy. And if your preferred candidate supporting that policy doesn't get into office, put pressure on them and say, this is what we demand. because the person that took that job, that was elected, their job is to represent you.
Great. That's a great answer. I want to shift back to economics for our last question here. Who is your favorite economist, past or present?
Does Nash count?
Mm.
He's a mathematician. I don't think I have one. I don't think I have
Perfectly fine.
favorites. I've got a lot of favorite people I try to model myself after, but I'll get back to you on that.
All right. No, I mean, if you're someone with innovative economic ideas, then modeling yourself after pre-existing economic ideas might not be the smartest option.
I'm glad you said that.
And then, yeah, so that's all the questions I have for you. Before we go, I just want to give you a quick 30-second, 60-second last pitch to voters, an opportunity to speak your mind and sort of summate who you are and why you're running.
Again, I've said I'm Patrick Harris Sr. You can look me up. I'm running for many reasons. First, I'm running because I was inspired based on some of the policies, and I want people to have be able to achieve the same type of success I was able to achieve. Second, I'm running to make a point. If you look at my campaign, I have not asked for endorsements. I have publicly stated I'm running a zero budget campaign, and I'm unknown. The three things that'll get you elected into office in today's environment is name recognition, who you know, and how much money you spend. I'm standing on a platform, policy, and messaging. Ask our founding fathers of this nation, did they want name recognition and money and endorsements to win the day? Or did they want the best ideas to prevail? So whatever happens with this election, I hope the next generation looks back on it, because cap the cap was introduced for the first time in history in this election, and look back on it and say, what happened when we needed innovative policies? And now what do we need to do in the future to attract, support, and retain the type of leadership we need representing us in the halls of Congress?
Great. Thank you, Patrick, for joining us. I've been Benjamin Glover, and this has been A Younger Voice. Keep up to date on social media, on Instagram and TikTok, for more clips from this episode as well as other episodes. Thank you for joining us again, Patrick, and this was A Younger Voice.